some theme parks don't close quietly. A 160-foot waterslide still haunts Kansas City's memory. A Japanese roller coaster became infamous because of one broken axle. And in West Virginia, old rides sit in the weeds like the park never fully died. These places were built for birthdays, summer crowds, and family photos. But before they were abandoned, each one became tied to a death the brochures never mentioned. And if stories like this are the reason you keep watching abandoned places long after the gates are locked, then stay with me. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's walk through these forgotten parks before the weeds, the lawsuits, and the silence erase what really happened there. These aren't fake haunted stories passed around for clicks. Every park on this list was real. The rides were real, the crowds were real, and the deaths connected to them left behind more than old headlines. Some of these places faced investigations. Some faced lawsuits. Some tried to reopen after tragedy, hoping the crowds would come back and the old memories would cover the darker ones. But once a fatal accident becomes part of a park's history, the place never feels the same again. A roller coaster isn't just a roller coaster anymore. A water slide isn't just a summer attraction. A rusted swing ride in the weeds starts to feel like evidence. So this is the story of 7 theme parks that were abandoned after people died there. What happened, what went wrong, and what was left behind when the laughter stopped. And by the end, we'll reach the park where the ride wasn't just closed after a child died. The entire site was later torn apart, piece by piece, until the landmark that once dominated the skyline was gone. But before we get to that final park, we have to start with the oldest ones on this list. A place where the rides didn't disappear after the deaths. They stayed behind. The oldest story on this list starts in Princeton, West Virginia in 1926. That's when businessman Conley T. Snidow bought land along Lake Shawnee and began turning it into a local amusement park, not a giant corporate resort, not a polished destination with movie characters and perfect landscaping. Just a small family park built for the people around Mercer County, and for a while, that was enough. There was a Ferris wheel, a swing ride, a swimming pool, racetrack, concession stands, cabins, and a dance hall where the lights came on after dark. For local families, especially in a place surrounded by coal country towns and mountain roads, Lake Shawnee was the kind of park that didn't need to be massive to matter. Kids could run ahead of their parents. Teenagers could meet near the rides. Families could spend a summer day there and feel like they'd stepped away from ordinary life for a few hours. But Lake Shawnee's history never stayed clean. During Snidow's ownership, reports say 2 people drowned at the park. Another death was tied to the swing ride in 1966, when a young girl was killed. And over time, those stories helped turn Lake Shawnee into something darker than a closed amusement park. People later wrapped the place in ghost stories. They called it haunted. They talked about curses, old tragedies, and the land itself. But the real record is already unsettling enough. A park built for families had deaths attached to its name. Then, in 1967, it closed after a failed health inspection. Years later, it briefly reopened, but rising insurance costs helped shut it down again in 1988. The strange part isn't just that people died there. It's that the rides didn't vanish. They stayed, rusting, waiting, turning the park into something between a local memory and a warning sign. Fact note: Lake Shawnee's opening year, features reported deaths, 1967 health inspection closure, and 1988 final closure are supported by the park history summary. But Lake Shawnee is only the beginning. Because the next abandoned park wasn't hidden in the mountains. It carried one of the most protected names in entertainment. But here's what most people get wrong about abandoned parks like these. Death doesn't always close the gates overnight. Sometimes the park keeps operating. Sometimes it reopens under new ownership. Sometimes the signs get repainted, the rides get renamed, and everyone tries to act like the story moved on. But it doesn't really move on. Once a fatal accident becomes part of a park's history, every detail starts to feel different. A broken track isn't just broken anymore. A drained pool isn't just ugly. A locked gate doesn't just mean the place failed. It starts to feel like evidence. Because these parks weren't only abandoned by crowds, they were abandoned by trust. And once families stop believing a place is safe, the bright colors don't look as bright. The music doesn't sound as innocent. The rides don't feel like rides anymore. They feel like warnings. And the next two parks prove that better than almost anywhere else. The next park is famous for a different reason. Because when people hear Disney, they don't think of abandonment. They think of control. Clean walkways, perfectly painted signs, music that never seems to stop. A place where even the trash cans feel planned. But River Country was different. Opened in 1976, it was Walt Disney World's first water park. A rustic, old-fashioned swimming hole built near Fort Wilderness, with rocks, slides, rope swings, wooden walkways, and water features that felt more natural than polished. It wasn't sleek like Typhoon Lagoon. It wasn't massive like Blizzard Beach. River Country felt smaller, rougher, warmer, like Disney had built a backyard swimming hole and invited thousands of families in. And then came the darker history. In 1980, an 11-year-old boy died after contracting amoebic meningoencephalitis after swimming there. Later, River Country saw 2 drowning deaths, 14-year-old Howard Pwepke in 1982 and 13-year-old Christopher Staff in 1989. But this wasn't a case where one death shut the park down the next day. That's the myth. The darker truth is slower. River Country stayed open long enough for the happy miseries and the tragic ones to sit on top of each other. Families kept coming. Kids kept sliding into the water. The music still played. The signs still smiled. Then, after the 2001 season, River Country closed. It was expected to reopen, but in 2005, Disney confirmed it would stay closed permanently. And when Disney finally left it behind, the slides, pools, and walkways slowly became one of the strangest abandoned places in the company's history. But if River Country's darkness was slow and quiet, the next park was the opposite. It didn't hide its danger. It practically sold tickets to it. Then there was Action Park. And Action Park wasn't remembered because of one single tragedy. It was remembered because danger seemed baked into the whole place. Opened in Vernon, New Jersey. In 1978, Action Parks sold itself like the opposite of a normal amusement park. Most parks strapped you in, slowed you down, and told you to keep your hands inside the ride. Action Park did something different. It handed people control. You steered, you raced, you slid, you made the mistake yourself. That was the thrill. And for a generation of teenagers, especially around New Jersey and New York, that was the whole point. Action Park felt wild, loose, and almost lawless. It had the Alpine Slide, where riders controlled their own speed down a mountain. It had go-karts, water slides, cliff jumps, and a wave pool so notorious some people later called it the Grave Pool. The park picked up nicknames for a reason. Traction Park, Accident Park, Class Action Park. But behind the jokes, the injuries were real. Action Park became known for poorly designed rides, undertrained staff, weak safety control, and a reputation that kept growing darker every season. At least 6 people are known to have died from ride-related incidents at the park before the original version closed in 1996. And that's what makes Action Park different from Lake Shawnee or River Country. It wasn't one abandoned ride with one dark story attached. It was a whole culture of risk. People came there to feel free. But freedom at Action Park had a cost. The same lack of control that made the park unforgettable also made it dangerous. Every scraped knee, every broken bone, every ambulance call became part of the legend. Action Park didn't have one haunted ride. It had an entire business model that felt like a dare. By the time the original park closed in 1996, the legend was already bigger than the place. People didn't just remember the rides. They remembered surviving them. But after a park built like a dare, the next case feels colder. Because this time, the tragedy didn't happen to someone chasing danger. It happened to a worker trying to fix a ride. After Action Park, the story changes. Because the next two parks weren't remembered for wild freedom or a long-running reputation for chaos. They were remembered for specific moments. The kind where one normal day suddenly becomes the day everyone talks about afterward. The first was Loudoun Castle Theme Park in Scotland. It opened in 1995, built around the ruins of a 19th-century castle near Galston, Ayrshire. On paper, it had everything a family park needed. Roller coasters, water rides, bright signs, a mascot, and the strange magic of real castle ruins sitting behind modern attractions. It looked like the kind of place where history and fun had been stitched together. But in July 2007, one of its darkest moments happened on a roller coaster called the Rat. The ride had become stuck. An 18-year-old ride operator named Mark Blackwood was pushing the coaster when he fell about 80 feet. He was taken to Crosshouse Hospital in Kilmarnock, but he died the next day. The park didn't close immediately after that. It continued operating. But the death became part of its final years, part of the shadow hanging over a place that was already fighting to survive. By 2010, Loudoun Castle closed for good, with the owner saying the park was no longer economically viable. And there's something quietly brutal about that ending. The castle ruins were already there when the rides arrived. After the park closed, the rides started to look like ruins too. But the next park is even more direct, and this time, it wasn't a coaster towering above castle ruins. It was a miniature train, the kind of ride families trust without thinking. Old Indiana Fun Park was located near Thorntown, Indiana, and opened in 1985 under the name Middle Country, USA. It was built as a family attraction, with rides, themed areas, and the kind of harmless-looking entertainment parents don't usually question. That's what makes what happened there so awful. In August 1996, a miniature train derailed and overturned. Nancy Jones, 57, was killed. Her 4-year-old granddaughter, Emily Hunt, was paralyzed. Several others were seriously injured, and this wasn't some towering thrill ride. It was a miniature train, the kind of ride grandparents take children on because it feels safe. Slow, simple, almost impossible to fear. But investigators later found the train had been traveling much faster than its design speed, and many of its brakes were broken, missing, or not connected. Reports also said many anti-derailment devices were missing. The speedometer was broken, and the train had derailed many times before the fatal crash. The park closed in 1996 after the accident. Much of it was auctioned off in early 1997 to help pay debt. Old Indiana didn't end with fireworks. It ended with a dead grandmother, a paralyzed child, court records, bankruptcy, and rides being sold off piece by piece. And now only 2 parks are left. Both had years of history behind them. Both had one ride people could point to. And both proved how quickly one mechanical failure can turn a family attraction into a national memory. By this point, the pattern is clear. The scariest abandoned parks aren't always the ones with the darkest legends. They're not always the ones with ghost stories, rusted Ferris wheels, or rides sitting in the weeds. Sometimes, the scariest parks are the ones where the warning signs were real. Maintenance records, failed parts, inspection questions, lawsuits, broken systems, decisions that only look obvious after someone dies. Because once the accident happens, everything gets re-examined. Every repair that was skipped, every complaint that was ignored, every ride that kept running when someone should stopped it. And that's what makes the final 2 parks different. In Japan, one broken axle brought down a park that had survived for decades. And in Kansas City, the final case wasn't just about a fatal accident. It was about a ride so extreme, so visible, and so tied to what happened there, that when it was finally gone, the whole park seemed to disappear with it. First, Japan, where one small piece of metal destroyed decades of trust. In Osaka, Japan, there was a park that survived for decades before one ride changed everything. Expoland opened around the site of Expo 70, The World Exposition held in Osaka, and for more than 30 years it worked like a normal family amusement park. Roller coasters, restaurants, shops, crowds moving through the gates on weekends and holidays. It wasn't some forgotten roadside attraction. It was established, familiar, part of the local entertainment landscape. Then came May 5, 2007. That day, the Fujin Raijin 2 roller coaster derailed while passengers were riding. A 19-year-old university student named Yoshino Kogawara was killed. Others were injured. And almost immediately, the story became bigger than one terrible accident. Because investigators found something colder than bad luck. The derailment was linked to a broken axle. Reports later said the ride's axles hadn't been replaced for 15 years. That's the part people couldn't forget. Not the height of the coaster, not the speed, not the design. One piece of metal. For years, families had trusted that ride. They had sat down, lowered the restraints, and believed the machine underneath them had been cared for properly. Then one failed part turned that trust into a public question. Expoland did reopen after the accident, but something had changed. The park wasn't just competing for visitors anymore. It was competing against memory, and memory usually wins. Attendance dropped, the park closed again. Then, in 2009, Expoland closed permanently. One piece of metal failed. Then public trust failed. Then the park did. But the final park on this list is even harder to forget, because the ride wasn't hidden deep inside the park. It dominated the skyline. This is the park from the beginning. The one where the tragedy didn't just close a ride. It erased the shape of the ride from the horizon. At Schlitterbahn, Kansas City, the ride was called Verrückt, a German word often translated as crazy or insane. And when it opened, that name felt like part of the marketing. It was promoted as the world's tallest waterslide, standing 168 feet high. Taller than many buildings. Tall enough that people could see it from the highway. Tall enough that the ride itself became the park's identity. You didn't have to visit Schlitterbahn, Kansas City, to know Verrückt was there. You just had to look up. It was built to be a record breaker, a headline, a dare in the shape of a waterslide. Then, on August 7, 2016, 10-year-old Caleb Schwab died while riding it. 2 other riders were injured. The park closed temporarily. Verrückt never reopened. And this is where the open loop from the beginning comes back. Remember the park where the ride wasn't just shut down after a child died? This was it. Verrückt didn't just disappear from the park map. It disappeared from the skyline. The ride was later decommissioned and dismantled. The towering structure that once made the park famous was taken apart, piece by piece, section by section, until the shape people used to see from the highway was gone. But the damage didn't stop with the slide. Schlitterbahn, Kansas City closed after the 2018 season. It didn't reopen for 2019. And in 2021, the remaining park was razed. That's what makes this final case so haunting. A ride built to be impossible to ignore became something the owners had to remove completely. A record-breaking attraction became evidence. And a park that once sold itself on summer thrills ended with empty land where the tallest waterslide in the world used to stand. Theme parks are built to feel safe. Bright lights, loud music, painted signs. Kids running ahead of their parents like nothing bad could ever happen there. But when someone dies inside a place like that, everything changes. The same ride becomes evidence. The same gate feels heavier. The same empty path doesn't feel abandoned. It feels unfinished. Lake Shawnee, River Country, Action Park, Loudoun Castle, Old Indiana, Expoland, and Schlitterbahn, Kansas City were all built for fun, but each one became tied to tragedy before the crowds disappeared. And in the end, what really died wasn't just the park. It was trust. If you remember an abandoned amusement park from your childhood, write its name in the comments. Some places only survive because people still talk about them. And next, we're going even deeper, into abandoned water parks where lawsuits, disasters, and strange design choices left entire pools and slides to rot in silence.